The war was over. The Valari had lost. Commander Lyra sat alone in the steel cage of the human warship. The cell was small, just large enough for her to sit and lie down. The walls were cold, and every time she touched them, she felt as if the ship itself reminded her she was no longer free. The air smelled of oil and iron, not of the fresh winds of her homeworld. There was no sky here, no light from the twin suns she grew up under, only the dim glow of human lamps humming with power she had once been feared. Entire human fleets trembled when her name was spoken. She had led her people across the stars with fire in her heart and iron in her will. For years, she had believed. Nothing could break her, but now here she was, broken, captured, defeated. The silence of her prison pressed on her chest harder than any chain. Every day she wondered if this was the end. Humans were not known for mercy. They fought like demons, relentless and unyielding. She had seen them tear through Valari lines, their ships burning bright with courage or madness. She could not tell which. And on the battlefield she had looked into their eyes. Cold, determined, merciless. She had seen their dead and left them behind. She had killed them with her own hands. Surely they would not forgive. So why was she alive? Lyra could not answer that. She had been dragged onto their ship after the final battle, her weapons stripped, her soldiers slain or scattered. She remembered the sound of the explosion that had ripped her flagship apart. She remembered the smoke choking her lungs as she tried to breathe. She remembered the moment when human boots stomped onto her bridge, and rough hands pulled her down. She had expected a blade then, quick, final, clean, but it had not come. Instead, they locked her here, in this metal box, with nothing but her thoughts for company. That was almost worse. Death would have been simple. But this waiting, this endless waiting, was torture. She had nothing but the sound of her heartbeat and the distant thrum of the human engines. Time itself seemed to stretch, cruel and slow. Every time footsteps echoed in the corridor outside, her body tensed. She would draw herself up tall, her silver eyes burning with pride she did not feel anymore. She would wait for the end. Surely, this time they would come for her. Surely this time the human soldier would open the door, raise his weapon, and silence her forever. But the steps always passed by. The silence always returned. Her mind betrayed her in those long hours. She thought of home. She saw the oceans of Valara, the stormy blue waves that raged beneath golden skies. She remembered the laughter of her soldiers, the fierce loyalty of those who had followed her into battle again and again. Most of them were gone now. Did any survive? Or was she the last piece of a lost people? The thought was a knife to her heart, yet even worse were the memories of her enemy, the humans. She remembered the way they shouted as they fought, not with fear, but with a strange fire that seemed to grow the closer they came to death. She remembered seeing a single human soldier charge through a line of her warriors, wounded and bleeding, but still fighting as if nothing could stop him. They should have broken long ago, she thought. They should have surrendered. Yet they never did. And now, it was her people who had fallen. Sometimes in the dark, Lyra whispered to herself, "This is what we get for underestimating them." She had thought humans were weak, fragile, too emotional to stand against the disciplined Valari. But she had been wrong. Their emotions were not weakness. They were weapons. Rage, love, hope. They carried these into battle like shields, and no strategy had been strong enough to shatter them. Now she was nothing but a trophy waiting in a cage. She could feel the weight of unseen eyes on her, the humans outside watching. Did they laugh at her? Did they celebrate that their once great enemy was now a prisoner? Perhaps. She did not care. Pride was all she had left, and she would not let them take it. So she sat with her head high even though her body trembled. She kept her silver eyes cold even though they sometimes burned with tears. If they came to kill her, she would not beg. She would not scream. She would meet her end as Commander Lyra of the Valari, unbroken. But in the quiet corners of her heart, she feared something more than death. She feared that the humans would not kill her at all. She feared that they would keep her alive, to strip her spirit slowly, until she forgot who she was. That was a fate worse than a blade, and when the heavy footsteps finally echoed again in the hall outside her cage, louder, closer than before, her breath caught in her throat. This was it. The end had come. Her hands clenched into fists, her body ready for the strike. The shadow of the human guard fell across her cell. She closed her eyes. So this is the moment. The footsteps grew louder until the door opened with a hiss. A tall figure stepped inside. It was not the officer she expected, nor an executioner with a gun. It was only a soldier, broad-shouldered, weary, wearing the gray uniform of the Terran fleet. His helmet was tucked under his arm, and a faint scar ran across his cheek. His eyes were sharp but not cruel. They carried a heaviness like someone who had seen too much and grown tired of it. Lyra braced herself. Her body stiffened, her silver eyes narrowing, ready to spit her final words, if needed. She thought he would draw his weapon. She thought he would end her story with a single shot. Instead, he placed something down, a tray. Steam curled up from a metal bowl on it. The smell of cooked grain and roasted meat filled the cold air. Lyra blinked, her mind struggling to understand. This was food for her? The human's voice broke the silence. Eat, he said simply. His tone was calm, almost flat, but not unkind. Lyra's pride burned inside her chest like fire. Did he think she was an animal, to be fed in a cage before slaughter? Did he want to watch her grovel, crawling on her knees for scraps? She clenched her jaw and forced her voice steady. I do not want your poison. The man didn't flinch. He didn't grow angry, didn't shout. He only sighed and shook his head, slowly. Suit yourself, but I'll keep bringing it. You'll starve long before we decide what to do with you. With that, he turned, placed the tray just inside the bars, and walked out. The door shut behind him, leaving her in silence once more. Lyra stared at the tray. The smell tugged at her. Hunger. It had been days since she had last eaten anything real. The rations given before had been stale, tasteless things. This was different. Warm, fresh. But still, her pride screamed at her. Do not touch it. Do not give them the satisfaction. So, she pushed it away and sat in the corner of her cell. Her back straight, her face cold. She told herself she didn't care. Yet her stomach betrayed her, growling loud in the silence. The next day he returned, the same human soldier. He carried another tray, this one with bread and fruit. Again he placed it down without a word. Again he left, and again Lyra refused. By the third day she began to notice things about him. His name tag read Reed. A simple name. Human names always sounded sharp, short, like strikes of steel. His face, though scarred, was strangely calm, as if the war had already drained all his rage away. When he set the food down this time, she snapped, Why do you do this? Why keep me alive? Reed glanced at her, his brown eyes steady. Because dead enemies don't change anything. The war's already over. What's the point of adding more bodies to the pile? His words struck her harder than any weapon. For her people, mercy was weakness. For humans, was it something else? She didn't answer. She couldn't. Days passed like this. Reed kept coming. He never mocked her, never insulted her, never raised a hand against her. Sometimes he even left objects behind, small books written in human script. At first, Lyra thought it was some kind of game. Did he expect her to learn their language, to become his pet? She ignored them at first. But loneliness is a crueler prison than walls. One night, when the silence was too heavy, she picked up a book. The words were strange, but she understood enough. It was not a war report, not propaganda, just a story about a human family living in peace. It made her chest ache. On the seventh day, hunger finally defeated her pride. She ate. Slowly at first, tasting each bite as if it were poison. But it was not. It was real food, simple, warm, filling. When Reed returned and saw the empty tray, he said nothing. He only gave a small nod, almost invisible, before leaving, again. Lyra found herself unsettled. She wanted to hate him. She wanted to see cruelty in his face, but there was none, only quiet weariness, and for the first time she wondered, perhaps this human was not her executioner at all. Perhaps he was something else. That night, alone in her cage, Lyra whispered to herself, "Why? Show me kindness." The question echoed in the silence, unanswered. But deep in her heart she feared the answer might change her forever. The cage no longer felt as silent as before. It was not because the steel walls had softened, nor because the lights had grown warmer. It was because of him, Reed, the human soldier who kept bringing food, who kept coming back even when she spat at him, even when she glared with all the hate she could summon. Commander Lyra of the Volari told herself it was a trick. It must be. No enemy was this patient. No human should care if she starved. And yet, every day at the same time he appeared. Sometimes with food, sometimes with books, sometimes with nothing more than a glance, a silent look that lingered before he turned away. She hated the way it made her wonder. One evening, when the dim lights of the corridor flickered, Reed came again. He placed down the tray, bread, meat, and water. He did not speak right away. He only stood there, watching her. Finally, he said, "You've been reading." Lyra's hands froze over the book she had tried to hide beneath her blanket. She wanted to snap at him, to deny it, but the words caught in her throat. She lifted her chin instead. "Your language is crude, broken, but easy to learn." Reed gave the smallest of smiles, though his eyes remained tired. Crude or not, it kept us alive long enough to fight back. That stung. She looked away, her pride aching. But he didn't press further. He never did. Days slipped into nights. Lyra began to eat without hesitation, though she never thanked him. Hunger had stripped her of that pride. And in return, Reed never demanded gratitude. He acted as though feeding her was as ordinary as breathing. That unsettled her even more. One night, when the silence grew too heavy to bear, she finally asked him the question that had burned in her chest for weeks. Why? Why show me kindness? Reed was leaning against the wall, his helmet tucked under his arm. His eyes lifted to hers, calm but weary. For a long moment he said nothing. Then his voice came, quiet and heavy. Because war already took too much. I won't let it take what's left of me. Lyra's breath caught. She stared at him, confused. She had expected anger, hatred, revenge. Instead, she saw something different in his eyes. Grief, pain, a sorrow so deep it felt endless, and something inside her chest cracked. That night, she did not sleep. She thought of her soldiers, of the men and women who had followed her into battles they could never win. She thought of their laughter, their loyalty, their sacrifice. War had taken them from her, and now this human, her enemy, was saying the same had happened to him. Could it be? Did humans mourn the same way Volari did? Did they ache when they lost the same way she did now? The thought gnawed at her. The next day she broke her own rule. When Reed arrived, she spoke first. "Tell me of your home," she demanded. He raised a brow but didn't question her sudden curiosity. He simply leaned against the bars, his voice soft. "Earth has forests, endless green. In winter, snow falls, and the world grows quiet, soft. My mother used to take me into the woods. She said the trees remembered everything." Lyra closed her eyes. She could almost see it. A world of silence and white. Not the golden storms of Valara, not the roaring waves of her own home. Something different, something peaceful. In return, she told him of Valara's twin sons, of how their light turned the oceans to fire at dawn. Reed listened without mocking, without interruption, and for the first time since her capture, Lyra felt less like a prisoner and more like someone. someone who still mattered. But the memory of blood was never far. As she lay awake that night, her mind turned cruel. She remembered the soldiers she had cut down with her own hands, the humans who had fallen screaming under her blade. Perhaps Reed had lost friends to her. Perhaps his grief came from wounds she had carved herself. The thought twisted in her stomach. When he returned the next day, she whispered, almost against her will, "I don't deserve this." Reed's jaw tightened. His eyes darkened, not with hatred, but with something heavier. He said nothing for a long time. Then finally he spoke, voice low. "Maybe, but I'm tired of endings. I'd rather try beginnings, even broken ones." Lyra stared at him. Her chest ached. The steel walls around her heart, built high and strong through years of war, began to crack wider, and she did not know if she feared it or longed for it. That night, for the first time, she dreamed not of fire and death, but of forests covered in snow. The cage that once felt like her coffin had begun to change. The walls were still steel, the light still harsh, but something was different now. It was not the place itself, it was the way she felt inside it. Reed's presence had carved cracks into her silence, and through those cracks, light was starting to slip in. "Commander." Lyra had sworn never to speak to a human beyond curses, yet she now found herself waiting for his visits. She told herself it was only because of the food, or the chance to hear something other than the hum of engines. But deep inside, she knew it was more. She was beginning to crave his voice, the quiet patience in his eyes. One evening, when the corridors outside her cage echoed with distant footsteps, Reed came as usual. He placed the tray down, soup and bread, and leaned back against the wall. For a while, they sat in silence. Then Lyra's voice broke the still air. "On Valara," she began, hesitant. "Storms dance across the oceans at night. The water glows blue when the lightning strikes. My soldiers used to sing when the storms came. They said it reminded them, the gods still watched us." Her voice trembled slightly. She had not spoken of her home in weeks. She half expected Reed to mock her, to laugh at the foolishness of her people, but he didn't. He listened quietly, his gaze fixed on her as though her words carried weight. When she finished, Reed nodded slowly. "Sounds beautiful," he said. Then, almost shyly, he added, "On Earth, the forests are so thick you can walk for hours without seeing the sky. The air smells of pine, and when the wind blows, the whole forest whispers." Lyra closed her eyes, trying to picture it. She saw towering trees, leaves rustling, sunlight falling in patches on the ground. It was so different from Valara, yet the way he described it, she could almost feel it. And for the first time in her life, she realized something simple and terrifying. She was beginning to care about the words of a human. The more they spoke, the more she noticed things she had ignored before. Reed never raised his voice. He never looked at her like a monster. He never treated her like a trophy or a threat. Instead, he spoke as though she was just another soul in the universe. Her pride, once her armor, began to feel heavy on her shoulders. She remembered the faces of her fallen soldiers. She remembered the fire in human eyes as they fought. They had been enemies, yes, but now, in this small corner of silence, she could not see him as an enemy anymore. One night, when Reed was about to leave, she stopped him. Her voice was soft, almost fragile. "Do you not hate me?" He turned, brows furrowed. "Why would I?" Her throat tightened. "Because I killed your kind. Because I led armies that burned your cities. Because you lost people, perhaps people you loved, to my hand." Reed's jaw tightened, and for a long time, he said nothing. His silence was heavier than any words. Finally, he spoke. "I've lost people, yes. More than I can count. Maybe even because of you. But hate?" He shook his head slowly. "Hate doesn't bring them back. It only keeps me bleeding." His voice carried no fire, only exhaustion. A man who had fought too long, who had seen too much. And something in Lyra's chest broke further. That night she could not sleep. His words haunted her. She had expected rage. She had expected curses, threats, vengeance. Instead, she found something far more dangerous: understanding. And with that understanding came guilt, a deep, twisting guilt that settled in her bones. She did not deserve his kindness. She did not deserve his calm. Yet he gave it anyway, without asking anything in return. The next day, she tried to push him away. She kept her answers short, her eyes cold. But Reed was patient. He stayed, speaking of small things: human music, the taste of coffee, the way snowflakes melted on his skin. Against her will, she found herself listening. Little by little, the walls inside her, built high from years of war, began to crumble. Lyra was afraid. Not of Reed, not of death, but of what was happening to her heart. She had lived her whole life believing humans were lesser, fragile, undeserving of respect. Now, in the quiet of her cage, she was beginning to see them differently. She was beginning to see him differently. The thought terrified her, because if the walls broke completely, she feared there would be no going back. And yet, in the silence of her cell, she could not stop wishing for the sound of his footsteps returning. Lyra had thought the hardest battles of her life had been fought on the field, where fire and steel clashed and the air reeked of blood. But she was wrong. The hardest battle was here, in this cage, in the quiet hours of the night when no one watched, because now the enemy was not outside her. The enemy was inside her. Reed's words echoed in her mind, circling like restless shadows. Hate doesn't bring them back. It only keeps me bleeding. She tried to bury those words, to push them away, but they clung to her like chains. For years she had carried hate like a weapon. Hate had fueled her, sharpened her, kept her moving when her body wanted to collapse. Hate had given her strength against the humans. But now, was it only another wound? When she closed her eyes, she saw their faces, the humans she had slain. The soldiers who had fallen under her blade. Their eyes haunted her, but now their shadows were joined by something worse: guilt. And guilt cut deeper than any sword. When Reed came again, she couldn't look at him. She ate in silence, her eyes on the ground. He seemed to sense her storm, but said nothing. That was his way. Never forcing, only waiting. Yet his silence made it worse. It gave her space to drown in her own thoughts. Finally, she broke. Her voice was low, almost a whisper. "I don't deserve this." Reed looked up, his brow furrowing. "Don't deserve what?" "This!" she snapped, sharper now, her pride trying to cover her weakness. She gestured at the food, the books, at him. "Your mercy, your any patience. I don't deserve it. My hands are soaked with your people's blood. I have led armies that burned your worlds. And you..." Her voice cracked. "You sit here as though I am worth saving." Reed's jaw tightened. His eyes darkened, and for a long time he said nothing. The silence was so heavy it made her chest ache. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but steady. "Maybe you're right. Maybe you don't deserve it. Maybe none of us do. But if all we do is measure who deserves what, then the war never ends. Someone has to stop it. Someone has to say enough." Lyra stared at him, stunned. His words struck her like a blade, but not in anger, in truth. That night she could not sleep. She lay on the thin blanket staring at the ceiling, her mind churning. She thought of her soldiers, their loyalty, their faith in her. They had believed in the old ways. Fight until the end. Never surrender. Never forgive. And she had believed, too. Until now. But Reed's presence tore holes in that belief. He was not supposed to be like this. Humans were supposed to be monsters, vengeful and cruel. And yet here he was, showing her a kind of strength she had never understood. The strength to let go of hate. It terrified her. Because if he was right, if mercy was stronger than vengeance, then what had she been fighting for all this time? The next day when Reed arrived, she asked something she never thought she would. "Do you think I can change?" His eyes softened, though his face stayed serious. "Only you can answer that. But I think anyone can." Even me. Even you? She echoed. He nodded slowly. I've done things I'm not proud of. Things that wake me in the night. But every day I wake up, I try again. Not because I believe I'll erase it, but because maybe I can carry it differently. His words settled over her like a cloak, heavy but warm. That evening, as Reed left, Lyra's chest ached with a strange mix of pain and longing. She felt caught between two worlds. One side told her she was a commander, a Valari, sworn to hatred and war. The other side whispered that perhaps she could be something else, something more, if she only allowed herself to break. She did not know which path she would choose. But one thing was certain. The war inside her was fiercer than any battle she had ever fought, and for the first time she wasn't sure if she wanted to win it or surrender to it. The day her chains were removed came without warning. Lyra sat in her cell, her thoughts heavy as always when the door hissed open, but this time, the guards were not carrying food or books. Two humans stepped inside with tools. They said nothing. Their hands were quick, unlocking the clamps that bound her wrists and ankles. For so long she had lived with the weight of those, chains that her body felt strange without them, light, almost unsteady. She looked at them in suspicion. What game is this? Neither guard answered. They only stepped back, leaving her free. And then Reed entered. Her chest tightened. His helmet was tucked under his arm, his uniform a little worn at the seams, as if he had fought more battles than one man should. He stood tall, but not like a conqueror, more like someone bracing against a storm. Lyra rose slowly to her feet, her pride still alive even if her body trembled. "So this is the end," she said. Her voice was steady, though her heart pounded. "You will execute me without chains, then? Let me die standing, is that your mercy?" But Reed did not draw a weapon. He did not call for soldiers. Instead, he extended his hand, an open hand, empty, waiting. Lyra froze. She had faced human blades, human ships, human fury, but never this, an enemy's open hand. Her people never touched their enemies. To accept such a gesture was betrayal of everything she once swore to uphold. To take it would be to admit weakness, to abandon her oath, her pride, her very identity as Valari. Her instincts screamed at her to refuse. Yet, there was something in Reed's gaze that disarmed her more than any weapon ever had. His eyes were not cruel, not sharp, not triumphant. They were steady, fragile, stubbornly human. They told her, "You are not just my enemy. You are more." Her breath shook. For a moment she almost turned away. She almost retreated back into the safety of her walls. But then her fingers, trembling, lifted. Slowly, cautiously, she placed her hand in his. Warmth. It startled her. Human. Skin was warm in a way she had never noticed before. Not burning, not searing, just steady, alive. That warmth traveled up her arm into her chest where something deep inside her cracked wider. For so long she had braced for death, for pain, for cruelty. But this was different. This was something she did not have a word for. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Why?" Reed's fingers closed gently around hers, not crushing, not forcing. "Because we've both lost too much," he said quietly. "And I don't want to lose more." Lyra's throat tightened. She wanted to speak, but no words came. She only stood there, her hand in his, the cage no longer feeling like a prison but like something else. Something new, terrifying, and fragile. The guards left them alone. Minutes passed, though to Lyra they felt like hours. She could not pull her hand away. Part of her wanted to, part of her screamed that this was dangerous, that she was betraying her people. But another part, deeper, quieter, refused to let go. She had lived her whole life wrapped in iron and pride, believing strength was measured in how fiercely she could hate. But in this single touch, Reed had shown her something different. A Strength that did not come from hate at all. A strength that came from holding, not striking. It terrified her. And yet, it healed her. When at last she did pull her hand away, it was not out of anger, but out of fear of what she was beginning to feel. She turned her face aside, but her voice betrayed her heart. This changes nothing. I am still your enemy. Reed did not argue. He did not try to correct her. He only gave a small nod as though he understood more than she wanted him to. Maybe, he said softly. Or maybe it changes everything. Then he left, leaving her hand still tingling with the memory of warmth. That night, alone in her cell, Lyra held her hand to her chest as though she could still feel his touch. She had expected the memory to burn like shame. Instead, it glowed like a fragile ember in the darkness. For the first time since the war began, she realized she was no longer afraid of death. What frightened her now was life. Lyra had braced for pain all her life. As a soldier, as a commander, as a prisoner, pain had been her companion. She had trained herself to expect the strike before it fell, to prepare her body for the cut of a blade, for the sharp sting of betrayal. But she had never in all her years prepared herself for kindness. Kindness was harder to endure than chains. Since the day Reed had offered his hand, something inside her had shifted. She could still feel the warmth of his skin against hers, a memory that clung like fire yet soothed like water. She carried it with her in the quiet hours, when the hum of the ship filled her ears. She carried it in her dreams, where she now saw forests of green instead of fields of ash, and it frightened her more than any weapon ever had. The war within her grew louder each day. Part of her screamed that this was weakness, that she was betraying her people by letting a human's kindness touch her heart. But another part, small, fragile but stubborn, whispered that maybe this was not betrayal at all. Maybe this was survival of a different kind. One evening Reed returned, as he always did, but this time he did not bring food. He sat down outside her cell, his back against the cold wall, and let out a heavy breath. His shoulders sagged as if the weight of the galaxy pressed down on him. "You are tired," Lyra said quietly. Reed chuckled without humor. "Always." His eyes lifted to hers, tired but steady. "Some days I don't even know why I keep going." Her chest tightened. She had seen humans on the battlefield, fierce, unstoppable, burning with fury. She had never imagined one of them admitting doubt, admitting weariness. It made him seem less like an enemy and more like a man. And before she realized what she was doing, her voice softened. "You keep going," she said, "because you are stronger than you believe. Even when you are tired, you stand. That is why you frighten us, Reed. Not because of your weapons, because of your hearts." The words left her trembling. She had spoken them without thought, straight from the wound in her chest. Reed looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he reached out his hand again. Not forcing, just offering. Lyra hesitated. The first time she had touched him, it had felt like betrayal of everything she once was. But this time it felt like something else. Not betrayal, but choice. Her fingers slid into his. The warmth spread again, steady and grounding. And this time, she did not pull away. Silence hung between them, but it was not heavy. It was gentle, filled with something new. Lyra realized she no longer felt like a prisoner in this cell. She felt human, not in the sense of species, but in the sense of being seen, being recognized. Her voice broke the quiet. "I thought the end of my life would come by a human's hand." Reed tilted his head slightly. "And now?" She drew in a breath. "Now I think the end of my old life has already come. And maybe that is not death. Maybe it is something else." Reed's lips curved in the faintest of smiles. "Maybe it's the start of something better."